Hello, everyone. Good evening. If it's any solace, I'm getting the loudest feedback here. So welcome. Thanks for coming this evening. My name's Ted Herman. I'm a professor at Elizabethtown College. I'm also on the History Center's Board of Directors. So I had a little bit of an inside edge to be able to speak here. That's okay, no laughter is necessary. But seriously, always a pleasure to have programs like this, especially tonight, because we are here the week of Veterans Day, but also we're here on the 80th anniversary of World War II. This is kind of wrapping up the end of events that occurred 80 years ago this year. So the first thing I'd like to do, because we are Veterans Day, could our veterans stand, put their hand up, Colonel Fossnot's down here, any others? Let's give them a round of applause, please. Sincerely, John, thank you for your service. Pleasure to have you with us tonight. World War II is something that has fascinated me for a long time. Ever since I was a kid, I got to know a lot of the World War II veterans in my community growing up. And the fact that I could take one of those old Reader's Digest books, that were around my grandmother's house, and I could read about places like Iwo Jima, the Battle of the Bulge, and Pearl Harbor, and then to recognize that people in my own hometown or in my church were at those places, it just fascinated me. And I was lucky to be able to catch them where they were still able to share a lot of those stories and willing to talk. So the one thing that I want to start with is with an apology. Being in Hershey, we are going to be talking about a lot of Italian names. And so to all my Italian friends out there, please give me a little bit of grace when I'm pronouncing those names, because I grew up in a Pennsylvania German household where no words ended in I. So bear with me. But seriously, so think about World War II. You have to understand the numbers. And by the numbers, I mean the size and the sweep of this conflict. It occurred over 6 years, and there were 60 million dead over that time. That is one death every 3 seconds for 6 straight years. It was on 6 continents. It involved 47 countries, and it involved destruction and ruin that had never been seen before and has never been seen since. And really, to think about what was going on in 1941, Pennsylvania and the United States had populations greatly reduced from what they are today. So the United States only had 132 million population in 1940. 12% of them ended up in the armed forces. That is a huge number. Over 400,000 soldiers were killed. Soldiers, sailors, and airmen. 26,000 of those were from Pennsylvania. 670,000 were wounded, one of those being my grandfather. 6 million women entered the workforce, 350,000 in the armed forces. 1.2 million African Americans served in the military as well. Just a huge, huge undertaking. To understand America, you have to understand World War II to a degree. Things that are present for us today, even in NATO, United Nations, superpowers, things like the Truman Doctrine, which we're still looking at today in terms of the global set of global pecking order, so to speak. The Cold War came directly out of World War II, and also empires abroad ended, civil rights exploded. So why is this still relevant 80 years later? Here are a bunch of reasons for me. This is my family's involvement in World War II, just my family, right here. Not my wife's, just me. Both my grandfathers served. One was 30, had a kid, and was had been actively employed for a long time. The other one was drafted before he even finished high school. And again, varying uncles here. But this is what I lived with, and I had the experience of knowing many of them. Even our board here at the History Center, this is an example of members of, just here at the History Center, in that small group of 15 board members that have connections to World War II. So it really touches everyone. So November 1945, the war's been over in Europe for about 6 months. The Nuremberg trials are just starting. In the Pacific, the war's been over for barely 2 months. There are troops returning home. There are soldiers that are still suffering. There are war bond rallies that are still going on, so it's still very much an active military and civilian experience and engagement in the war. This is a global map that shows how many countries were impacted or involved in the war. And you can see here the high tide in the Pacific touched a huge swath of real estate. The same in Europe, the high tide, 1942. And this is the totals for how many personnel were going into the military throughout the 6 years of the conflict. So can I see a show of hands of anybody that had a grandfather, father, uncle, parent who was involved in World War II? Almost everybody, right? That's what this represents. And so as these numbers grew, America became really an important world power which had never existed before. So think about 1939. Before the draft started, the Army by itself, with its 189,000, was actually smaller than the perennial military might of Norway, Netherlands, and Romania. We were really behind the 8 ball, but you can see how things pulled together, and we went from 174,000 to 12 million, 16 million served in total. Now, by the end of 1945, 50 million men between 18 and 45 had registered for the draft, and you can see how many were in, how many had been inducted. So how do we, at the time, reflect what's going on in faraway lands, or even just with veterans leaving their community? These service flags started to appear. They're commonly called sun in the service flags, blue stars. Gold star would represent somebody who was killed. Occasionally you will see a silver star. And they would hang in the window. Let's see if I can, there you go. You can just see over the shoulder there, hanging in the window, this wedding picture of the flags. And this was also a common occurrence. Many businesses and churches also had community flags, as you can see right there. Now in Hershey, the first honor roll was actually Swatara Station. And so I'm assuming most of you know where Swatara Station is, just a little bit to the west of Hershey. The railroad station still exists, and that was kind of the Little Italy of Hershey in the very heavily Italian community over there. This was, as you can see here, this was dedicated on September 4th, 1943. It sat in a lot that was vacant at the time, which is next to where the Penn Hotel Sports Bar is now. In fact, if your eyes are really good, you can see right there is the railroad underpass behind it. And this contained the names at the time of 84 servicemen. The benediction was offered by Reverend Mayana of the St. Joan of Arc Church. And it was actually unveiled by two servicemen who were home on leave, Emilio Sciboni and William Gingrich. And 8 families at the time had 3 sons in the service. And so this is what it looked like from the front. You can see it's a simple listing on generally wooden or paper slats behind glass that would have contain the name of the veteran who was in the service. So the second one was actually the broader Derry Township Court of Honor. And if any of you are wondering why the name Court of Honor still exists, this is why. That's what the original name was in 1943 when it was dedicated. And you can see that we're here at the community building, obviously, but the Court of Honor here was in the form of panels that were put around the balustrade there. And a dedication ceremony was held there November 7th of 1943. With over 1,000 people in attendance. There were speeches given. It was actually sponsored by American Legion Post 386, and it was in part commemorating the 25th anniversary of the time of the end of World War I. And as you can imagine, a lot of those veterans didn't get a whole lot of recognition with World War II going on. So here is a really good panoramic that was put together showing the panels. And at the time that this was dedicated, it contained 864 names on those panels. And there's a close-up of what it looked like again. Very similar to what Swatara Station had, where you have the names on panels surrounding the courtyard there. Now, this is what the Court of Honor sign looked like, which was just to the left of the steps there. And so I tried to get a little bit creative and plug this into AI and see how it would clean up. And it did pretty good, although apparently it couldn't read post 386. It, for some reason, changed that to 105. But, you know, that's pretty good. It's pretty close. It's pretty close. But the sign actually said, Court of Honor, Derry Township Defenders of America, sponsored by Post 386, American Legion, Hershey, Pennsylvania.
Not Derby Township.
Oh. So, think about the hearts and minds concept and symbolism. World War II is packed with it. You see these famous posters, the WOW. Anyone know what WOW stands for? Woman Ordnance Worker. Yes. So you've got the Rosie the Riveter, so to speak, there, looking into the shadows of her sweetheart overseas. There was actually an office created called the Office of War Information. And there's a famous quote from that gentleman from 1942. It said, "The principal battleground of the war is not the Pacific, it is not the Middle East, it is not England or Norway or Russia, it is American opinion." And that's what the focus was early in the war, was getting people rallied behind the war. And you can see this kind of symbolism, and it's harking back to the American Revolution, which American Revolution harked back to a lot of symbolism from prior. But this, you know, the Minuteman from Concord, who has appeared on all kinds of things, encouraging people to, to do more for the war, right? It's a citizen soldier concept. You're leaving your plow behind, and picking up arms, which is a total myth, which was made up by Ralph Waldo Emerson. But this was that symbolism. This was the purpose of that. And that Greek mythology, res publica, from one many, to benefit the community. That was really the symbolism there. And you can see it even in the posters here, targeting directly back to Americans always fight for liberty. Makes you want to pick up arms and do what you can. Until you get rationed. Then things get interesting, so, you know. So, but this was part of it. And the idea of giving something up on the home front to sacrifice for those soldiers overseas was the same type of symbolism. You have folks growing victory gardens, you have, you know, again, you see these rations popping up, canning, all kinds of things to conserve and to reuse. Does anyone know what the first item rationed was? Rubber is correct. As soon as the Philippines were attacked, rubber became rationed. Does anyone know what the first food rationed was?
Sugar.
Very good. It was sugar. April of 1942. Anyone know what the last food to come off of rationing was?
Spam.
Not sure that was ever rationed, but actually it's a trick question. It was also sugar. Sugar was the first foodstuff rationed and the last to come off of rationing, and that actually lasted all the way until 1947. No. The Brits actually had rationing until the 50s. That's how hard they were hit by the war. So again, the war requires sacrifice. Look at the immense production. Again, it's like the troops going into the military. Look at how our production ramped up. We built 17 aircraft carriers, 297,000 aircraft, 193,000 artillery pieces, 86,000 tanks, and 2 million trucks and vehicles of all kinds in 4 years. We supplied 2/3 of every product for every allied nation. That's how massive the industrial base was here in the United States. Now, some of that rationing and scrap drives, the reuse, the salvaging, was not only to feed public opinion, but also out of need. And I love this picture here on the left of the boys, you know, walking the cart around, picking up scrap. Advertisements appeared in different magazines, imploring people, if you can recycle one iron, it can make 2 helmets, trying to directly tie that into the military. People ripped up fences. It just, it wasn't just going through the attic. I mean, it was true sacrifice. And it wasn't just metal. It was waste paper, it was fats, oils, newspapers, all kinds of things that were being collected. This really hit home for me a number of years ago. I was actually traveling in South Carolina, stopped in Columbia at the state capitol, and I ran across this base of a monument. And I thought, well, that's an odd thing to have in a Capitol Park. What's that? It was actually a Spanish-American War trophy that was brought back in 1898 from Cuba. In 1943, it was scrapped and melted down for the war effort. I mean, can you imagine today, that it'd be unheard of. They actually went out in Utah. The rail line had moved from where the original Golden Spike had gone through, Transcontinental Railroad. They ripped up the original rails from the Transcontinental Railroad and scrapped them during World War II. That's how committed the country was to this effort. And this is what a typical scrap drive would have looked like, usually a collection point. Some of the collection points in Hershey were actually the garages. S's, Lausanne's, people would come in and bring items for reuse. There were other ways to get behind the war. The Aircraft Warning Service, early in the war. In 1942, the war was like being on the moon at that point. Just daily life was complete 180 from what you had known several months ago. People were paranoid about foreign planes flying over. They created the Aircraft Warning Service. One of the spotters was actually in Senior Hall. They also had them in the hotel, in the community building. They report any planes overseas, or flying overhead. There's a whole network of communication points. We also had American Red Cross. There was bandage rolling and letter writing. There were servicemen's relief efforts. There were sending servicemen gifts. There was a Servicemen's Gifts Committee. Boy Scouts were involved, collecting old rags and waste fats to take to the collection points for people that couldn't get out. Hershey Zoo was closed for the duration of the war. The admission, I saw they were showing a movie at the community building, community theater, and admission was 4 ounces of copper was your admission ticket, trying to get people to do their part for the war effort. The trolley continued to run in town. That was kind of on its last legs in the late 30s. That got extended because of gas rationing and getting people transportation to get to work. And things like Hershey Estates Dairy went from the normal milk trucks. Some of them actually went back to horse-drawn delivery wagons to conserve gas. So there was all kinds of sacrifices that were going on. Here's a class of young women who are learning about machining. And this was in part of the Hershey factory at the time. Again, trying to pick up skills as men went to war that women had not been asked to do previously. But Hershey's biggest commitment to the war from town was, of course, Hershey's chocolate. I was just talking to someone up here, and they were talking about how the labels for the Hershey chocolate products looked different from the military to what the civilian was. It's because they tasted a lot different. Military chocolate started being developed in 1935. There was a concerted effort from the Quartermaster Corps for 2 reasons. Number one was mobility. In the 30s, we were watching what was going on around the world. Even though we weren't involved, we could see the new type of war. And an army truly does move on its stomach. So think about this. Eisenhower's headquarters before D-Day figured that to sustain 1 soldier in the field, it would take 42 pounds of stuff, ammunition, gasoline, food, a day. They landed 300,000 guys on D-Day. So 42 times 300,000 every day, and that number is growing every day. That's how important logistics and food and rationing was to the troops. The number of rations that Hershey produced was staggering. And they weren't unlike any other industry. They quickly retooled, changed over to make what was a civilian product into a military product. The first order for ration bars after the formula was developed was actually in 1937. They continued to produce this through 1943. And 500 million D-ration bars were produced. But actually, the tropical bar, which wasn't invented until 1943, went into production. They produced 700 million of those in the last 3 years of the war. And overall, between all the products that they did, Hershey was in K rations, C rations, air crew lunches, bailout for pilots and air crews, life raft rations, emergency rations, POW packets. They produced over 3 billion products for the military during that period of time. That's just amazing numbers. Now, they were impacted because you can see on the right here the number of products that were being produced before the war. That went down to basically 3 or 4 products for commercial consumption during the war. Just because 75% of everything they were making was going to the military. Reese's company was also impacted. They actually began focusing on the peanut butter cup because of sugar rationing. Of the 12 products that Reese's made before the war, peanut butter cup took the least amount of sugar. That's why it was their focus. And even the packaging, if you think about innovation, and we're talking about products, look at that cocoa can, that syrup. That takes metal. That's a steel can. That's done. 1942, you have no material for that. So they switched over to cardboard. They were actually boxing the cocoa in cardboard tins. The packaging evolved from foil, which again, war material, can't do it. Commercial wrappers are being embossed with a thin layer of aluminum foil. That's done. So what do? You wrap it in glassine. Do you guys know what glassine is? You ever been to the post office? You get an little envelope with your stamps? That's glassine. That's what the chocolate bars are being wrapped in. Early in the war, something called cellophane is invented by DuPont. That gets, comes in the mix. Anything that you can do to innovate, to completely change, again, not just your product, but now your packaging and how you're moving that overseas. So Hershey had a very good war record. In fact, the United States was very good about acknowledging and honoring war production. There were 85,000 companies during the war that produced war materials. Of those, only 5% attained the Army-Navy E Award for efficiency. 4,283 plants got that. Hershey got it 4 times. Actually 5. They got 4 stars on there, plus the original one. And only 426 Pennsylvania companies earned this, and Hershey got 5. That's how vital it was to the war effort. There was a ceremony that was held in August 27th of 1942. It was held on this lawn by the windowless office building, which at the time was windowless, not now. And you can see here some pictures from that event. There were 3,000 employees and citizens there. It kicked off at 12:15. The Quartermaster General of the United States actually was there to present Hershey with its first flag. The inventor of the chocolate bar, Sam Hinkle, was on the stage. The Quartermaster Corps scientist, Paul Logan, who worked with Hinkle to invent the chocolate bar, the D-ration bar, was on the stage. And Milton Hershey, at 85 years old, was on the stage. You can see him here, top center. And Milton Hershey, you can see here they're presenting the flag to him. This is Mr. Hershey right here. This is the Quartermaster General right here, and this is Bill Murray, the president of the chocolate company. And you see obviously some factory workers there on the right. They actually got Mr. Hershey to speak at the time. It was very rare to get him to make public comment. But he actually said, if the bombs come, there is no age discrimination, so we should have the same right to live and fight for our country as any boy on the front. There is no age limit to service of the country, was part of his speech. And you can see here how proud he was. And quite frankly, everything that I've read about Milton Hershey, founding a successful chocolate company, opening a Hershey Industrial School, were 2 of his proudest achievements. But I think this was a close third. He was very, very patriotic to the end of his life. And this was really his opportunity to give back. The gentleman who is pictured here, his name is Ralph Light, and he actually accepted the E Award pin on behalf of all the company employees. He had been a Hershey employee since 1920, and he actually had 5 sons that were in the service at the time, and that was early in the war. If that was August of 1942. And 4 of them were actually former Hershey employees themselves. So that was Mr. Light's contribution to the day. So let's talk about some local faces of the war. So the first soldiers that went into the military was actually October of 1940 was the first peacetime draft in U.S. history. And each one left behind people, left behind classmates, left behind family. But it's important to remember that not everybody from the Hershey community is listed on those bronze plaques. Those are people in the Court of Honor who left from Derry Township. Obviously, the infamous Dick Winters, who didn't come to Hershey until 1970, but is really associated with military service in this community. There were people like Al Charles, who was a 1941 graduate of Hershey Industrial School. He actually grew up very close to my hometown of Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania. He was a machinist, went to work for Glen L. Martin Company in Baltimore, had a deferment from the draft, but enlisted in the Navy because he felt like he could do more. And he ended up landing on D-Day, actually D+1, and went from Glen L. Martin Company to handling ordnance for the Navy. He was in a Navy Beach Battalion. You have Betty Hancock, who for years was the nurse at the Hershey Hospital, went to Hershey Chocolate Corporation, went to the Reese's factory, didn't come to town until 1946, had served as a nurse in England. The very long-lived Carmen Chango, who just died, actually, I think it was last November, at what, 105? Probably one of the last World War II veterans. He came to town from Shamokin after the war. Another gentleman I knew, his name was Ralph Fink. He was a 35-year house parent at Milton Hershey School. Served in North Africa, Italy, southern France, all the way into Germany. The unit that he was with actually liberated Dachau concentration camp, 45th Infantry Division. And then you have some folks that represent Hershey that left from here. It's a very big supporter of the Hershey History Center. It was Carl Stump. And Carl remembered, and when I interviewed him a number of years ago, Carl hadn't been in a unit where guys were dying. He was in a supply depot, was very lucky to be in a supply depot in Guam. But he remembered vividly the guys that used to hang out at his father's garage in Palmdale who didn't come back. And that still, that same, that kind of strange sense of survivor's guilt stuck with Carl 70 years after the war. I found this was very interesting. A father and son veteran, Austin Geiling, Jr. and Sr. Sr. Was actually a manager for years before the war at Hershey Drug Store and also at D'Angelo's Restaurant. He was drafted at age 38 and was sent to Camp Lee, Virginia, and ran their NCO club down there. While his son, Austin Jr., was in the 4th Marine Division, was in landings on Kwajalein and Saipan, and was actually wounded in both engagements. On Saipan, he was actually laying down and was shot by a sniper. It went into his shoulder, went down his back, hit a rib, and came out his side. And he was in the hospital from June of 1944 until February of 1945, recovering from that wound. You have Harold and Marlon Brandt. Marlon was a little bit older. He was 10 years older than Harold. He was in his 30s when he was drafted, went into the Quartermaster Corps, and served in Fort Sam Houston in Texas. Harold, who was for many years a principal at the middle school in town, served with the 11th and the 4th Armored Divisions, and he actually, his first combat in the 11th Armored Division was on December 30th, 1944, trying to relieve Bastogne. That was where he went into combat and served for 130 consecutive days on the front lines. Now we're going to get into my pronunciation trouble. Well, So on the left, we have Aldo Dempsey. I'm sorry. We have Aldo Dempsey Paparella. Where are you, Paoletti? Correct me here if I'm wrong. All right. Jim Geyer and Gabe Paparella. How am I saying that?
You got it.
Okay. And I like that picture because these kind of represent to me that true sense of family and community, because here you've got three guys probably grew up together from the same neighborhood. You got some brothers there. That is when they came home. You can see that by what they're wearing on their uniforms, and you kind of see the expressions. It's a mix of relief, but I think also happiness. And you see the guys on the right, that is Sparto Leone, Frank Leone, and Ralph Pacini. How am I doing? All right. Okay, thank you. Grazie. But this is before they went overseas, and you can see the expressions and how it's just a little bit different, a little bit happier. Smiles are a little bit bigger, and I really like those pictures from Swatara Station. And here we have Angelo Paoletti. And I love this picture that Lou shared with me of his parents' marriage in April of 1944, before he went overseas. And you can just see that, that happiness, that vision, of the future, and it really comes through in a day like that with this picture. He worked for Cagnoli Bakeries, was a truck driver, and that transitioned into his military occupation. He ended up serving as a truck driver in the 807th Aviation Engineer Battalion on Guam and Okinawa, and made it back. I just love that picture. And then we have Guy Zucchini, U.S. Coast Guard, was taking troops in on an LST during D-Day. A lot of people don't know the Coast Guard was involved in a lot of those operations. You've got the 1945 Hershey High School yearbook showing 11 of their faculty that went into the military. And then you've got the Castelli brothers, Alfred, Samuel, Joe, and Anthony, all from the same family, went into the military. Not everybody came home. One of the first ones was to perish from the area was Pete Luciani. He was on a destroyer, and his destroyer was torpedoed and sunk off of Guadalcanal in November of 1942, the USS Barton. Berto Bacchini was wounded on April 14th, 1945, in Italy, where his parents had immigrated from decades earlier. He was serving in the 10th Mountain Division. He died on April 25th, a week after being wounded, and only a week before the end of the war. You have the sports star, Johnny Hummer, who was not just a multi-sport sports star at Hershey, also at F&M College. Was in the 270th Field Artillery Battalion as a forward observer. His position was spotted. He was out in front of his unit, and he was killed by a mortar round with a direct hit in his position in November of 1944. Now, a lot of people don't realize some of the community connections here, but there are connections even hanging from the rafters at the Giant Center. Frank Mathers served in the Royal Canadian Air Force as a sergeant, a pilot instructor. Ken Hatt, CEO of Herco, was in the anti-aircraft artillery during World War II. Another bear, the bull, Lloyd Blinko. He was actually sent to Shepherd Field in Texas, and was one of their entertainment coordinators for the base. Went into the Army Air Force. And Brent Hancock, who actually, this is his uniform right here, he served in the 3rd Marine Division, was in Guadalcanal, Bougainville campaigns, and was actually an aide to the commanding general of the 3rd Marine Division, Turnage. There was some other uniqueness to Hershey. There were 3 planes that bore the name Hershey. The first one, the Hershey Hellion, by John Ginder. Now actually there were 2 Hershey Hellions. He was shot down on D+1 on June 7th, was actually found and hidden by the French underground, rejoined his unit, and plane number 2 was, of course, the Hershey Hellion 2. There was also a B-17 in Italy named the Hershey Wolves. The bombardier on that plane was Milton Hershey Snavely, Joe Snavely's son. And the third was actually a B-29, nicknamed the City of Hershey, which was actually a group name. All the planes were named after cities. Chick Rice from Hershey was on that plane. And the unique part of this was they actually flew the plane to Olmsted Air Force Base in November of 1945 and held a war bond tour for a week in the area. Now, the one thing I think to keep in mind as we talk about the things that these guys survived and came back to was they carried a piece of that war with them forever. It not only changed their lives, but it changed their perspective. There was a famous book written about the 100th bomb group, which was called The Bloody 100th, flew out of England, and the author said how much he appreciated life after the war. His quote was, "The closer you are to death, the greater joy you take in life, as life used men up quickly." And I can't imagine seeing this type of death and destruction and turning around and coming back to the community. I mean, the picture in the upper left-hand corner was actually the town of Cologne, Germany. It was a medieval city, and that's what it looked like after 262 air raids dropped 35,000 tons of bombs on the city. And that was town after town after town. These guys saw people at their very best, and they also saw people at their very worst. But they came home, we honored them. There were several things in town. This was a veterans welcome dinner in February of 1946 at the community building. There was also parades and a celebration at the stadium, as well as a remembrance of those who died in September of 1946. Part of the remembrance is still in Swatara Station, close to where the original honor roll was. This Italian marble monument that was erected in 1957 is Remembrance Day, remembered annually, Memorial Day. But also, of course, the Court of Honor, as I mentioned, was just rededicated last year. That had moved around a couple of times, and ended up back just in the shadows of where its original location was at the community building. And this is something that's very important for me. That is me, by the way. Long time ago. And that's me with 2 of my uncles that served. And this was really, this was the pinnacle of their lives. They learned to lead, they learned values. There were highs and lows from the war. And I was thinking of this story that I heard one time where, I think it's an Irish saying, where somebody goes up to heaven's gates, knocks on the gate, and St. Peter says, "Hi, what can I do for you?" Says, "I would like to enter." He says, "Absolutely, show me your scars." And he says, "Well, I don't have any scars." And St. Peter says, "You didn't find anything worth fighting for?" these guys found something worth fighting for. And it was for us. It was really for us. Each person had a story to tell from the war. Now I hope tonight I can inspire you a little bit to learn about some of those stories, to learn about some of that sacrifice. And I'd encourage you to ask yourself, just when you're traveling around Hershey, or if you're not from Hershey, your local community, and think about, what do we have in that community that was shaped by these men? For 60 years, they were the fabric of the community, men and women, everyone that served. Their history is really our history. And, that's the one takeaway I hope you get from this, is to think about and have a greater appreciation for what they did. And one quote that sticks in my mind, but I always come back to the World War II veterans, is, I heard somebody say one time, "I'm scared to meet my heroes because I'm afraid they'll be a letdown." Well, these guys were my heroes, and there was no letdown. So, thank you very much for your attention. I will open the floor for any questions or conversation that you might have. Yes? Thank you. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned the sun and the service flags had gold, silver, and blue stars. I, of course, was familiar with the Gold Star mothers and knew what blue stars stood for. What did silver signify?
Wounded. Yep. I haven't seen many of those. They aren't that common, but I can tell you I do actually have my grandmother's, great-grandmother's flag that hung in her window. And there's 2 stars, one for my grandfather, one for my uncle. One of them has a silver sticker pasted over it. So that's very special for me to have. Anybody else? Colonel?
Well, one of the things I discovered in researching Hershey chocolate during the war is that the M&M candy was created specifically for the military, and that they wanted some type of candy that would not melt in your hands. Well, do you know what M&M stands for?
Murray.
Who was Murray?
William Murray.
Yeah, who was he?
He was in my picture. I gave your answer away.
Murray was the president of Hershey Chocolate.
Right. But it was his son. It wasn't him. It was his son that actually went in with Forrest Mars Jr. So same family, but
Yeah.
not William Urey.
But the
I
chocolate
forget what his name was, but the
in
son.
those
Yeah.
M&Ms up until 47 or 48 was Hershey's.
Yep.
So all through the war, and that's often overlooked. That it was not just our chocolate bar, but those M&Ms as well.
Well, and for years, I believe Hershey's actually did a larger wholesale business than it did just commercial retail
Now,
business.
all the Mars
Yeah.
products.
Yeah. Well, they sold all the chocolate to Reese's and many, that's why I believe Milton Hershey created, I think it was called Chocolate Sales Corporation for all those wholesalers. So,
But I'd love to just add some comments to Johnny Hummer. He was up there. He's Hershey High class of 1933. And he wasn't just an athlete. He earned 13 varsity letters in 4 years. Football, basketball, baseball, and his junior year he ran track. That record will never be broken. And the thing about Johnny, yes, when he was killed, he was a forward observer. But his unit, the 270th Field Artillery Unit, they had the largest field piece in the American Army. It was a 240 millimeter gun, howitzer actually. And when I would talk about him at Memorial Day, I would tell people that gun could reach from where we're standing here in Hershey to downtown Harrisburg. Now he was the S2. He was responsible for going out there and finding where they should position the guns, doing a reconnaissance of the area, things like that. The point being, he was way behind the lines. And yes, they got strafed one time by German aircraft, but the Luftwaffe had more or less been, made a zero factor after D-Day. As regards ground support, they were still pretty effective in getting after our bombers. Well, the battle that he falls in, the American Army had run across France. They got up to the fortifications around Metz. But outside Metz was the Maginot Line, the German or the French, system of fortifications that was put in after World War I. Well, his unit, because they had these huge guns in there, was given the task of taking these artillery pieces over and firing them. Now, Johnny, they were secluded, they were in a very safe position, huge bunkers with metal tops and everything. Johnny volunteered for that mission. He didn't have to go.
And he won a Silver Star for doing that.
Well, the reason he got it was Johnny being him. He was attached to a battalion of the 90th Infantry Division, which is the one my cousin was in, who by the way was killed in Normandy. He has to go with them, cross the Moselle River, make a river assault, and that is not easy. And then they came upon these German fortifications and attacked them. Now, what he did was, he's up front, but he couldn't, he was responsible for directing these huge artillery rounds that could probably have knocked out these World War I fortifications. He goes forward, he goes too far forward. And probably a German mortar unit got him while he was out there. He is mentioned specifically, you probably have found that, in the after-action report of that infantry battalion. And for that reason, he was awarded the Silver Star.
You also wrote a great article about that a number of years ago, I remember. And
Oh,
the reason that stuck with me is because my grandfather was in the 278th Field Artillery Battalion,
Yeah.
which was one of the other 240 units. So, a lot of connection there. So, thank you, Tom. Yes?
Hey, Ted, first of all, I want to say thanks for doing this. I wish everybody in Hershey could see your presentation, and I wish every community in America would do something like this for World War II history. I'm Jeff Patton. I'm the Vice President of the Central Pennsylvania World War II Roundtable. And so Ted gave me the opportunity to give me a quick public service announcement. But if you appreciate World War II history, which I imagine everybody here does, we meet monthly, the first Thursday of every month, and I have some flyers over on the table right here. We used to meet in Hummelstown, and next month we're actually moving to a new location in Legalstown at American Legion Post 272. Where our program, our website is on here, has all information. So if you're interested, come talk to us afterwards. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. I take cash or check.
Oh, and that's gonna bounce. Next, in December, we actually have a World War II veteran, Bill Balabano, merchant mariner, who's gonna talk to our group. It's a great story, and he's a local.
Good gentleman. I had the opportunity to hang out with him in September down at the Eisenhower World War II weekend. Really cool guy. Really sharp for 99. Wow. Any other questions? Yes?
I'm
Hi.
just curious, the Hershey Helene plane, do you know what air base that flew out of?
I'm sure I have that information, but it's hard to get into the nitty gritty and presentation of
I'm
this.
just curious, it's my father served
Yep.
at an air base.
Yeah, I can get you that information. I know I have it. I just
It
probably
was
not
Light
with me.
Air Force.
So, yeah, yep.
Yeah.
But that's the one thing with those units is when they got over into France and Belgium, they actually moved. A lot of times they would actually take over Luftwaffe bases to stay close to the front lines with the fighter bombers. So there's probably one base in England, and then they probably moved when they got into continental Europe. So, Lewis.
I just want to compliment you. I knew you were going to do this now for about a year, and it was way, I knew it would be good, but it was way, I knew it would be great. It was way great.
Lou's justifying skipping his class tonight.
You touched on everything, and a year ago, I was in Italy, my ancestral hometown. I did a presentation, but picture of Beto Bikini that you showed.
I didn't say it that way, though.
What's that?
I didn't say it that way.
Pretty well. I think you shortened it to Bert, which is fine. And he was born, to be very, very brief, he was born in 1920 in Hershey, as was my dad. When I was a little boy, I remember my dad telling me this. I came along late, by the way. They both fought World War II. My dad told me the story that there was a fellow from Hershey who was in Italy, and he had plans to go visit Nonna, that's my grandmother, who was in Pigliano, Italy during World War II. And my dad was born here, moved to Italy, then he came back. He didn't want to fight for Mussolini, so he decided to fight for good guys. And my dad told me, he said, this soldier from Hershey had plans to visit my Nonna, my grandmother, but he never made it because he was killed. And you explained that, so perfectly. That picture, it was him in a battlefield receiving the Bronze Star, all right, which is a medal for valor, bravery. He was receiving the Bronze Star from General George Price Hayes, a World War I Medal of Honor recipient. And he was killed shortly after that picture was taken. And he's buried in the Florence American Cemetery, just 2 hours from where his parents emigrated. It's a very, very sad story. I get choked up talking about it, and I'm more than touched that you showed this picture.
Well, and that's the one thing, an unfortunate thing of doing a presentation like this, where you're trying to cover a lot of ground. I mean, there are several topics in here, certainly Hershey chocolate. You know, I've done a program on the city of Hershey. There's stuff that you can really get, and John Ginder, that you can get very granular with. But trying to, accurately represent a lot of different
You did it all.
pieces,
You did it,
it's,
right?
yeah, so this was just a different presentation, so. Yes, sir.
Just one piece of trivia, because he mentioned the Merchant Marines. I had the privilege of going to my nephew's Merchant Marine Academy graduation. I just want to pass on that that's the only service academy where the students or midshipmen have a battle flag, because Merchant Marine students were killed in World War II.
Well, thanks everyone for coming. I have a few things here on display. Come up, ask me any questions you want, but I appreciate you coming out tonight. Thank you.